Hi, hope you had a great day. You're watching Jerry Entertainment, and for this video, I'm going to rank all Disney Plus Premier Access movies from the least successful to the most successful. These movies include movies like Black Widow, Jungle Cruise, Mulan, Raya and the Last Dragon, and Cruella. So those are all the 5 movies that came on Disney Plus Premier Access that I will be ranking in this video by success. This success will include the money that they did on Premier Access as well as the money they did on theaters. So yeah, that's how I want to rank them. And if you end up enjoying this video, please make sure to leave a like. I would very much appreciate it. As well as subscribe so you can get a lot more videos like this. And tell me down in the comments below which movie did you see in Disney Plus Premier Access, which movie did you see on theaters, or did you not see any of them? Just tell me that down in the comments below. Okay, now let's get started. So the way I'm going to be ranking these movies is going to be from least successful to the most successful, and I'm going to rank them based on their opening weekend. Why not their full lifetime or their full window? It's because I just don't have the official numbers for Disney Plus Premier Access for the full window. I only have concrete, pretty reliable numbers for the first 2 days. There is a bunch of numbers floating around overall, but they seem kind of fake. I just don't know how much they're trustworthy. So I'm only doing the first 3 days, so or the first 4 days in some cases, depending on the weekend, so that it doesn't get all mixed up. So that's what I'm doing. And for this video, I will be including, like I said earlier, theatrical and box office and Disney Plus Premier Access for the opening weekend. So that's how I want to be ranking them. Usually the opening weekend will be the same as how they will do overall, ranked among each other. So that's how I'm going to be doing it. So, let's start with number 5. Yes, as you just saw, number 5 is Mulan. Mulan actually did the most Premier Access, but this is because of a big, huge thing, which is that it was not available for theaters whenever it came out. It was only available in Premier Access. So the only way you could see this movie was the Premier Access. And people did see it with 1.12 million US households on Labor Day weekend, which was a 4-day weekend, watching the movie, making a total of $33.58 million on its opening weekend on just Disney Plus Premier Access. There was no theater attached to it. It was only came on Disney Plus Premier Access. So that is a lot of money. That is the most money in Premier Access. If we're just counting by Premier Access, this one would be number 1. But it had nothing on theaters, and all of the movies have things in theaters that made it beat Mulan. And this one only did $38.58 million on opening weekend for the domestic box office. So it's the last place. And this comes for a lot of reasons. It was very badly received from critics. It was very badly received from audiences. There was a huge controversy on the movie itself, and there was a huge controversy on Disney Plus Premier Access over if it was too expensive, too cheap, blah blah blah. All that type of stuff definitely caused this movie to be a flop for Disney, to be honest. So yeah, that's the numbers for Mulan. Now let's move on to number 4. Number 4, Raya and the Last Dragon. Raya and the Last Dragon did an estimated amount of 80% of the business that Mulan did in Premier Access for the opening weekend. Meaning Raya and the Last Dragon did $26.86 million from Premier Access money from the US, plus an additional $8.6 million from theaters, for a total of $35.5 million for its domestic opening weekend debut, which is pretty nice. One thing that we do have to keep in mind is that this would have gone 3rd place if it was just for Premier Access money, which is pretty interesting. And Raya and the Last Dragon came out second, the second place, worst to the pandemic. Like pandemic was really bad when Raya and the Last Dragon was coming out. The pandemic was really bad. A bunch of theaters were closed. A theater chain actually decided to not play the movie because that movie was going to come out in Premier Access, which was something that went against it really bad for its opening weekend, which is why the domestic debut for its opening weekend on theaters was really low, which was $8.6 million. That's very low, and that's mainly because that pandemic was really bad. A bunch of theaters were closed, and the theaters that were open, some of them decided to not play the movie, which is really bad for the movie itself. However, it ended up doing really good money in Premier Access, to the point where it ended up getting more than Mulan with Premier Access money and theater money. It's still 4th place in this list though, so it's not super high, which makes sense. This movie was always supposed to be a smaller movie than the other movies, in my opinion. The marketing team didn't do such a great job in marketing the movie either. So I just think that this movie ended up being a decent hit opening wise, but it did end up getting really strong holds, not only theater wise but also Disney Plus Premier Access wise, which I think ended up doing really good business for this movie overall. So I think overall this movie ended up being a really big hit. But coming out of the opening weekend wise, it was just a decent hit, and it ended up making 4th place in this list. It still would have not beaten any of the movies above from this list, but it still ended up being a pretty big hit. So now let's move on to the third place of this list. And number three, or third place, as you just saw, is Cruella with 686 K households, U.S. households watched Cruella on its 4-day opening weekend, costing a total of $20.7 million from Disney Plus Premier Access. And then Cruella also came out in theaters, making $26.5 million from theaters, for a total of $47.2 million from the domestic side, which is pretty big. It easily beats the previous two movies by around 15 million, which is pretty high. Our Ryan the Dragon 10 million. So it beats it by a good margin, and that was pretty good. It is worth noting that Cruella came out in a way better spot pandemic-wise than Ryan the Last Dragon had come out. Ryan the Last Dragon had come out in a terrible pandemic spot where the COVID was still super high up. COVID cases were still super high up. Most theaters were closed. A theater chain did not want to open Ryan the Last Dragon just because it was coming out in Premier Access and they wanted to set the deal. And that caused a huge problem for Ryan the Dragon, making the box office debut lower. And this was a huge problem for Ryan the Dragon. As for Cruella, this problem got fixed, causing more theaters to be available for Cruella, as well as the pandemic was just way better at the time. Vaccine has started to roll out, people were vaccinated, they felt more safe, and a bunch of people went to theaters that weekend. Not only for Cruella, but for A Quiet Place 2. And that weekend was pretty huge. And it obviously shows on its box office numbers. It's mainly because a bunch of more theaters were open, vaccines were rolling out, whereas for Ryan the Last Dragon, that was not the case. It was completely the opposite. A bunch of theaters were closed, and there was COVID was the worst. So it makes sense why it beat that movie, box office wise. But if you actually end up looking at its Premier Access numbers, it ended up getting last place from just Disney Plus Premier Access. And I think that's because most people went to theaters in this case. But if we just kind of did it from Premier Access, it did the worst money in Premier Access, which is very interesting to see how this actually kind of works. But overall, for the Disney Plus Premier Access money and the theater money, I'm doing third place for this list, which is pretty high with $47.2 million domestically. Now let's move on to second place. And as you saw, second place goes to Jungle Cruise with 777K US households watching Jungle Cruise on its opening 3-day weekend, which equals a total of $23.3 million from Disney Plus Premier Access alone. And then add to that the $34.2 million that Jungle Cruise did from theaters, for a total of $57.5 million from its domestic opening weekend debut, which is pretty high. It's higher than all the movies in this list. However, I think it's harder than other movies in this list because it came out also in a way better time, pandemic speaking. This means that much more theaters were open and people were starting to get used to going back to theaters. With big movies coming out exclusively to theaters like Quiet Place 2 and Fast and Furious 9. And then other movies started to come out in theaters as well, like Black Widow, Space Jam, stuff like that definitely started bringing people back to theaters. So for this movie, maybe there was a lot of people hesitant to go back to theaters to just go see this movie, which definitely helped its box office. However, this movie was the fourth lowest, which is second to last place for the Disney Plus Premier Access money, only being above Cruella, which is quite interesting, meaning that Raya and the Last Dragon and Mulan and Black Widow did more money in Premier Access if we were just counting Premier Access alone, which is really interesting to note, because we see that it didn't do that well in Premier Access, but like we said, it did very well in theaters, simply because I do think that the pandemic was way less worse. A lot more theaters were open, and I think a lot of people were just like, yeah, why not? Let's go see it on theaters, and then they went to go see it on theaters. So that's quite interesting to note, and it ended up doing a $57.5 million domestic opening weekend debut. Okay, now on to first place, which I'm pretty sure you can already guess, but still, let's go on to first place. At first place is Black Widow with 1.1 million US households watching Black Widow on its 3-day opening weekend, making $33 million on Disney Plus Premier Access domestically, and plus adding the $80.37 million from theaters, making a total of $110.37 million for its domestic opening weekend debut. This is easily the highest one out of this whole list, almost doubling Jungle Cruise, which is the second highest, which is crazy. And I think it's pretty obvious why that is. I think it's, first of all, Marvel, which is the strongest brand. Easily from this list, Marvel is pretty strong. I think this one had a lot more hype than all other movies for marketing and all that type of stuff. It had a lot more hype. And I also think that the pandemic was also at its lowest when this movie came out, with the pandemic barely having a lot of cases in the US domestically, not worldwide, but domestically it had very few cases. And Fast and Furious 9 had just come out like 2 weeks before it, causing a lot of people to go back to theaters, causing a bunch of people that maybe would have now seen Black Widow in theaters not being hesitant and going back to theaters. And then people that were hesitant very clearly bought Black Widow on Disney Plus Premier Access because the movie made $33 million on Disney Plus Premier Access. And if we were just counting the Disney Plus Premier Access money, Black Widow would have been second place on the Premier Access money, only behind Mulan, which did not have any theatrical release. So that's quite interesting. And that means that Black Widow did a lot of business both sides, which is really, really, really nice for Black Widow. So yeah, that's why I think this movie was the highest one. I think the pandemic had a lot to do with it. I think the brand had a lot to do with it. Obviously, Jungle Cruise maybe was a little bit lower on the theater side than this one because the Delta variant is starting to come back, and maybe that will hurt it, but we'll see. But definitely Black Widow was number one, as we see, easily topping this list. Very happy for Black Widow, and we can totally see why Scarlett Johansson wants part of that money of Disney Plus Premier Access. With only $33 million on its opening weekend, you can just imagine how much money that movie did full on weeks after, and then not only domestically but globally, which, as we know, had a $60 million debut for Disney Plus Premier Access. So that's quite interesting. And yeah, that's the number one movie in this list. And that was the ranking for all Disney Plus Premier Access movies, ranked from least successful to most successful, from how much money was made. I hope you enjoying this video, and I hope you ended up finding it interesting or informative. And if you did, please leave a like. It would very much help me out, and it would very much help out this video out. And why not? If you end up enjoying it or find it interesting, then please leave a like. As well, subscribe to get a bunch more videos like this. I'm working on a lot of analysis videos, which is why I made this list to already have the numbers. So definitely subscribe so you can see a lot of more analysis videos, as well as a lot of other content like Marvel content and so on and so on. So definitely subscribe for that content. In fact, my last analysis video was this video about what happens if Scarlett Johansson wins the lawsuit against Disney, and you definitely want to go check that out. There's a lot of big things. What impact would that result have in the entertainment industry? It will have a huge impact that you definitely want to check out. So definitely go ahead and check it out. Link will be in the corner, as you can see. Let me put it in the corner. And also, don't forget to leave down a comment down below and tell me, did any of these movies surprise you on how they were ranked? Did you expect the movie to be higher than the other movie? Did you expect the movie to be lower than another movie? Definitely tell me that down in the comments down below. As well as I said earlier, which movie did you see maybe on Premier Access? Maybe which one did you go see on theaters? And so on and so on. Definitely tell me that down in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and this is Entertainment out.